Hello, my name's Kathy Garretts, and I'm one of the film curators at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a Q&A to go with our annual program featuring the prize winner and honorable mentions for the Eisner Prize in Film and Video for 2019-2020. A screening was originally scheduled in our theater for May, but both the screening and the judging was postponed because of the original stay-at-home order and the closing of most of UC Berkeley campus due to the pandemic. Now, many months later, we are presenting the Eisner screening online for the first time with the program of films available for the entire month of December, allowing us, hopefully, the potential to reach even a wider audience. So the Eisner is the highest award for creativity given on the UC Berkeley campus. We've been hosting a screening related to the film and video competition for almost 30 years, and we welcome the opportunity to share this year's creative visions with all of you. A big thanks to Catherine Guzman of the Prize and Honors program, and to Jeffrey Scholar, who is the faculty advisor for the Film and Video Prize. We're really delighted that 9 of the 10 filmmakers are joining us for the conversation. They'll be they'll welcome hearing your questions. Just put them in the question section. And we will read them to the filmmakers following a few questions of our own. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce Althea Wasow, who is completing her PhD in the Department of Film and Media and taught the history of avant-garde film course at UC Berkeley. She's going to introduce this year's prize winner, Yijian Shan. Althea?
Hi, it's such a pleasure and honor to introduce Yijian Shan. And I just want to congratulate all the filmmakers receiving honorable mention, and especially Yijian for winning the Eisner Prize. It's wonderful. Yijian was my student in history of avant-garde film, and room 3225, which she produced for the course, is such a stunning film. Before I say a little bit about Yijian, I want to talk about my first encounter with the film. In April 2020, Yijian posted her work in progress video clip for feedback in our final workshop for the class. And late at night, I watched her rough cut, and her film took my breath away. Her experimentation with stillness and movement, its layered and unexpected exploration of film form, language, and the stark images, the clash of black and white and color. And it's important to note the stunning cinematography by her director of photography, Monica Wu. Yijian is a senior, and before I move on, I just want to say, when I was watching it late at night, I thought, oh, this must be what it was like for an instructor who had Claire Denis or Maya Deren or Wong Kar-wai or so, I don't know. So I was like, this is seeing their work as a college student. And I felt so privileged and so energized looking at that work in progress and working with her over the semester. And it's beautiful work. Yijian is a senior double majoring at UC Berkeley, double majoring in media studies and film and media. She's a prolific filmmaker and photographer, and has completed works ranging from fiction, avant-garde experimental, and photojournalism. She's worked as an intern for the New York Times and as an assistant for director and playwright Stan Lai, and as a photojournalist for the Daily Californian. Before I turn it over to the group and to Yijian, it is important to note that she got her start creating quote unquote window movies with her father. She calls these window movies, and creating narratives and scenarios as she looked out the window of her home with her dad and as a child. And I just think it's interesting, this kind of window moving formative background. And I recently had to write about her film, and I described it as an early quarantine masterpiece. And so it was such a pleasure working with her, and it's such a pleasure to introduce her. And congratulations to her and all the filmmakers.
Great, thank you so much, Althea. And so we'd like to bring up Yijian, and I'm going to ask her to answer a question, and then after she does, starting with Ian, we'll go through all of the filmmakers on the program, with the exception of Yijian, in the order that their films are screened, so you can begin to associate a face with the film title. So I echo Althea's congratulations to all of you. It's such a pleasure to see your films and immerse myself in them and to share them with our audience. So I'd like all of you, starting with Yijian, to answer. Please introduce yourself, indicate the name of your film, and let us know some of the main ideas you were exploring in your film and if they changed during the making of it. Congratulations, Yijian.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I'm Yijian Shan, and I'm a senior double major in media studies and film at Berkeley. And the name of my film is called Room 3225. And it's about my special experience during the pandemic when everyone has to stay in one place for several months. And in this film, I'm trying to explore the meaning of room and how during this special experience of the pandemic, the definition of room actually distorted during my experience, and it becomes the extension of my own senses and perception, and how it becomes a container of my senses and become part of my organ and skin, and how this interacts with the meaning of cinema as a container of images and as a skin of moving images and illusion. And yeah, that's basically about it, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And now we'll go to the top of the order of the films, and Ian, if you could answer the question as well.
Sure. Hi, my name's Ian. I just graduated this May, major in computer science and film. And the title of my film is Crossing. So my film is heavily inspired by John Cocteau and Maya Deren, as I was really fascinated with the surrealist aspects of their film. And my film is shot on 16mm stock film, black and white, because I really wanted to explore the medium specificity of this film stock as opposed to digital filmmaking. And I think my film, it invites multiple interpretations, but in my opinion, I wanted to tell a story about parapraxis, or a Freudian slip, and unfulfilled sexual desire. So the film is based on a very common dream pattern, the act of chasing. And the film is about a man who dreamed about chasing after a woman in a spiral staircase, but failed to contain her, which is the personification of his sexual desire within his subconsciousness. And the film is drastically shortened because of the pandemic. The original screenplay was 3 pages long, I think, and it was across multiple landscapes. And I could talk more about it later if there is interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Mo?
Hi, my name is Mo. I just graduated this May. I majored in film. So the film I made, is called Summer Films. So basically the film is about the pro-democratic movement that happened in 2019 in Hong Kong. And basically my role in the film, it was very, in my opinion, it was very avant-garde. It was very experimental. It wasn't like a traditional, it wasn't like things that you'll see on traditional media, like on traditional news. So my film was very personal. It wasn't about telling the facts that you see all the time on the TV, but it was about the experience that I had and some very personal feelings and thoughts that I had after experiencing the movement in a first person perspective. So then the film is a first person reflection of myself. So this film, it was made as a final project for my avant-garde film class. So then I think it was a very important the fact that it was made during the class. I think it had a very big impact on my film, because at first I was I really wanted to make a documentary, but since it was an avant-garde class, then I made it more experimental. I made it more about myself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm a senior interdisciplinary studies major. And the film I made was called 48. And I guess primarily it plays around with the idea of time. So both the time that we can't recover, and the time that we increasingly like don't have left, and like that visceral feeling of time running out in terms of our like environmental circumstances around us. So I wanted to play around with memory and like a character that tries to retreat or escape into memories of nostalgia that comfort him. But ultimately within those memories is the kind of seed of what wakes him up to his reality and kind of feelings of environmental like responsibility. Yeah.
Thank you. Lena?
Hey everyone, my name is Lena Joshi. I just graduated also in May from the graduate program with an MFA in art practice. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, so film isn't actually my one thing, but it's one of many things that I do. This short experimental film was created partially as a background for a live performance that I would do in front of it, as it was projected quite large outdoors at night or wherever the scenario might have been. And it's non-narrative poetic text superimposed over like landscape and 3D models built in a program called PhotoScan, which is primarily used to document stable environments such as like building facades or the environment, but I used it to document my body, kind of like purposefully misusing it for a non-stable environment such as the human body. And I think that the piece is sort of an exploration of an antithesis to this like innate call that we have because of the commercialization of the internet and social media to constantly create a brand and identity for ourselves online, and instead works towards like identity subterfuge or like hiding of one's identity so that it can't quite be capitalized upon in the ways that we have come to witness it being done so. Yeah, and it's like an interplay between questions of the body, which is very much figured in the piece, but never clearly seen. So it's either chroma keyed out and filled with static and noise, or it's this sort of like glitched 3D model made in PhotoScan. And then it's also a poem with the text. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Scarlett. I double majored in Russian language and literature and peace and conflict studies, not film, but I made Phobias. So my film is called Phobias, and it was intended on being part of a series, and I've shot 2.5 of them so far. This one, I started off with myself. So I wanted to create a film that simultaneously depicted a subject encountering a legitimate phobia that they had, and also like elicited, induced phobic experience in the viewer. So I am scared of needles. I'm absolutely terrified of them in the same way that someone could describe themselves being claustrophobic. I'm also disabled. I have a heart condition, and I had to receive lots of needles in my life. I had infusions for 7 hours, 3 times a week for most of my teenage life. And so this was my choice to interact with my phobia in a controlled setting.
Thank you. Monica?
Hi everyone, my name is Monica, and I'm a 4th-year Berkeley student, and the film I made is called Karaoke. I actually wrote this film and directed together with Yijian, and we first originally thought of it as a love story, but when the pandemic started to hit, we kind of thought it we couldn't write about a love story anymore. Love just seemed less relevant to us when the pandemic hit. So we kind of twisted this love story into a political allegory that is about our thoughts of the often contradictory ideas we experience as a Chinese students, and also our thoughts, especially the feeling of aggregated and like polarizing attention and contradiction during the pandemic.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I just graduated this May with a degree in film. My film's title is Lupe. It's based upon the 1930s Mexican Hollywood actress Lupe Velez. It's a film that is kind of based upon my experience as a Latina in the American film industry. And I was really fascinated with Lupe Velez and all of the work she did, and played a very big role in the Hollywood industry as a stereotype. And I initially, when first thinking about making this film, I really wanted to recreate her work and kind of film it in my own perspective, but I was really limited on my resources at the time. So instead I decided to work with found footage and archival footage of her. And so I turned it around, and basically the whole film is about found footage, borrowed words. So it was a lot of research, and it kind of is a personal experience for me because it kind of really goes deeply into my relationship with the film industry as a Latina and what kind of is expected, or has a very strong history of stereotypes and kind of misogyny and all sorts of themes like that.
Thank you. Simona?
It was my film is called Georgia in 12 Acts. I'm just showing the first act in this program. It's going to be a longer film, and I made it for as a component of my dissertation, which I filed in May. And it is about an Italian-German actress who was most active in Hollywood films and Italian and French New Wave films in the 50s and 60s. I also grew up knowing her, and at the time I knew her, she was not an actress, and I kind of was always curious about what happened to her career. And this was a way for me to explore the interplay between her life and her career, the kind of fiction that was created out of her life for the screen, and the kind of truth that was also in there as she had to play these roles that were reflecting her own reality in terms of marriage in Italy. And she was German, but in playing in Italian roles, so she was often dubbed. So yeah, this is both a personal exploration of her life and also a lot of playing with found footage as well, as Stephanie did in her film.
Okay, thank you. So most of you mentioned what department you were in. And so the next question has to do with making work, in a university setting. If you didn't happen to mention your department, will you when you answer this question? So film production isn't a major component of UC Berkeley's offerings. And yet every year students make wonderful films such as all of yours. But they do it without the support of like a full-scale production capacities within the university. So I'd like to ask, was your film made for a class? And if so, how did that impact on it? Did films you saw in your classes or on your own impact on your thinking about your film? And did you do any research for your film? And if so, what did that entail? So different parts of that question will relate to different of your films, and some of you have already addressed that. So we'll start with Yijian.
As I mentioned before, I'm a media studies and film double major, and I actually made the film in Althea's class, History of Avant-Garde. And yeah, thank you so much, Althea, for introducing me and for like bringing this amazing class to me. And I was actually really inspired by the works we covered in the class. For example, I tried to use voiceovers and to use sound that never in sync with the images, which was inspired by Deluxe's point about pure cinema and how to free the images from the text. And also I tried to use like two characters speaking in voiceover, talking about entirely different issues, which somehow are connected together in an absurd conversation, which also explores the nonsensical aspect of dadaism. So I was really largely inspired by a lot of content in the class, and how Althea asked us to like explore our interests and to explore deeply into our life, and how the possibilities of film. And one of the issues I encountered with was the equipment and also resources of film production. But I tried to solve the problem by asking my roommates to be my actors, and also ask my friend Monica Wu to do the cinematography. And most of the sounds I recorded by my phone, and the camera was also my photo camera. So this kind of experience really inspired me, to see that the opportunities of filmmaking are not like restricted in like the equipment or resources, but it's more about getting inspirations and getting help, and also try to express emotions and feelings. So yeah, that's basically.
Great, thank you. Simona?
I was finishing, so I was filming here and there basically on vacations for a couple of years, but I was finishing the film right after I TA'd for Jeffrey Schuller's avant-garde class, which definitely made me think much more about the materiality of these archival films that were only available on YouTube, so very kind of grainy, and just embracing that. And also, having them echo each other in interesting ways, as well as having the voice disrupt and tell different stories completely than were told in the images. I graduated in comparative literature, but with a designated emphasis in film, and this film was kind of a complement to my dissertation I mentioned, and I worked with Nico Pereda on it just as he was coming to Berkeley, which was a great honor, and just working with him on kind of these hybrid observational scenes that I had shot, and really just allowing them to shine, and you know, being trickstery about it, I would say. I learned from him. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, great. Stephanie.
So my film was created for the avant-garde class, Film 129, with Professor Scholar and Simona as my GSI. It required a lot. It's an archival / found footage film. Like Simona, it's like I relied a lot on a lot of research through YouTube and through the Berkeley archive, but it was really difficult to find work from Lupe Velez, especially since she was primarily active in the 1930s. And I think I spent hundreds of hours scouring through YouTube and even just like Google and just trying to find like any little bits I could of her. And also I did grab some inspiration from a film, The Fake Fruit Factory, that was premiered at, or not premiered, screened at BAMPFA during my spring semester. And I kind of took that apart from that, and Professor Scholar also guided me in some directions with other films that I kind of, he actually lent to me, and I won't name how I got them, but I used it. And yeah.
There's actually a little moment from Chick Strand's film in your film, isn't there? Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Monica?
Yeah. I actually, we actually did encounter, we didn't actually make this film for a class. We kind of wanted it to be an individual project that we make for ourselves. And we did encounter some limitation. Like the most difficult one, I think, was, I guess, the lack of people. We didn't really have any professionals to help us. So like, we kind of forced our friends to help. They were absolutely amazing, and they're the reason that this film happened. But most of them are not film majors, so this has been one of the major limitations that we faced. But I also did think that limitation can also push you to kind of go beyond your limitation that you thought yourself had. For example, like we both didn't think we would be really detail oriented, but we actually took care of a lot of details that like had to happen for making this film. So I'm like, they have both made it hard, but also like helped us grow enormously as filmmakers. And I feel like Berkeley, even though there are limited chances of hands-on experience, but we still have some classes. For example, I learned a lot from this semester's 185. And also I feel like the film theories we learn are also essential building blocks for making films that I guess are more than just entertainment.
Great.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Let's see. Hi, sorry, just a mute button. I storyboarded and started this in an intro to film class, and I was in avant-garde at the same time. And I went to New Mexico because my friend there is a paramedic, and so they were the only way I was going to shoot this was in like a medically safe manner, obviously, because for those of you who haven't seen it, it's needles and IVs. It's very, very scary, and it's all real. All the needles and all the blood and all the fear is real, which is the point of it. So the person who was the director of photography is like one of my absolute best friends, who was just kind enough to be there for a very frightening experience to see. So it was very much so just whoever was able to help him was who my crew ended up being, but I couldn't have done it any other way. So I'm really thankful that that's how it happened. I don't know if I could have made it in a different setting.
Yeah, so I guess I started this piece before starting class with Jacob Gabery, who is a professor in the film and media studies department. But it dovetailed really nicely in one of those circumstances of when you're working on something and then you start to do reading or like research or are, privy to reading or research that accidentally works so well with the idea you had and just streamlines everything for you. And so the class that I was taking with Jacob was called Technologies of Identification. And it was a mostly like theory-based course about sort of like the phenomenon of biometric data collection and how our data is collected online and how that is not neutral or will never be free of implicit bias and racialized oppression. And some of the texts we read were like Simone Brown's on Dark Matter on Surveillance of Blackness. And one that was a really foundational text for this piece was by a theorist named Teng-Hui Hu, who writes about lethargic artwork and like the reticence of digital art, sort of like how some digital artworks where they may seem lethargic or apolitical might be interpreted to allow the subject to actually like defer or set aside the burden of actualizing the self online and escaping some of that burden of representation. So that class ended up being super important, and I used the piece that I ended up creating as the final sort of like thesis project for that course. Yeah, and I agree with like a lot of the other artists who've spoken that, one of the nice things about being at Berkeley and for me being in the art practice department is that my most impactful courses were outside often of the department that I was in a program in and informed by the things I read in other courses. And that definitely turned out to be the case for this piece because it worked in adjacent to a body of sculptures that I made out of concrete called Screenshots, which are also about this like idea of identity abstraction in, as like the neoliberal subject under like capitalism and how we escape the confines of being extracted for our identities, but still manage to show up in ways that feel powerful to us, which can be a very difficult line to walk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I made my film, or I started making my film in the art department in a video production course with Layla Wifer. And I think I, in retrospect, was really influenced by her work stylistically, like more than I realized at the time, in the way that she creates these like insular, introverted dream spaces, which I really like the idea of doing because I really struggle with film, or the idea that film is like composed of external actions and that you can't make like introverted inward films. So I kind of enjoyed that challenge. And then I think my limitation was ironically like making it in the time frame of the class, because I couldn't quite figure it out. Like I couldn't quite figure out what the story was, and that kind of for this project, it kind of, the story came out like as I edited it and re-edited it. So yeah, and I think definitely like Joshua and Dylan at the DML were like such a huge help, and I'm like always bugging them for things constantly, and they're like always so helpful. So I definitely could not have made it without them. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, yeah, so like I said before, I made this film during my avant-garde class, and my professor was Professor Jeffrey Scholar, and I think he had a really big impact on my film, because at first my film what I wanted to make, it was more towards like a pure documentary. It was about, it was very informative, but instead, after what I've learned in the class, and after what Professor Scholar told me when we met and talked about my final project, I think after all these process, I've developed this vision of making like an avant-garde film that is, instead of very informative, it was more about myself. It was, and then I remember in one film that was screened during the class, it was a film by Sky Hopinka. It was about like the Native American tribe. And I think I really took a lot of inspiration from his film, because my film didn't include a lot of background information of what I was trying to tell. Instead, it was about, it was more targeted towards an audience that that I share a similar background. So it was more, maybe if you weren't paying too much attention to the news, then you wouldn't know so much about the facts that I'm telling in the film, but it was more about my personal experience.
Thank you.
So my film was originally, I started to make my film, I think last year before the pandemic started. And then I discovered the opportunity of the film 129, and I started bringing my sort of like personal pet project into the class. And Althea was my instructor, and she was tremendously helpful in getting us the equipment that we wanted to use, and also great thanks to Colin and Joshua from the DML, who helped us to get familiarized with all those 16 millimeter film techniques, because, well, for my film, it's, as I mentioned, it's sort of special because I didn't choose to use the digital camera. And so so they helped me get familiarized with like adjusting the focus, swapping out the lenses, and understanding concepts such as f-stop, depth of field, shutter speed, et cetera, et cetera. And well, and also I think one of the greatest challenges of making this film in particular, was lighting setting up the light properly, and also how to measure the light, how to measure the lighting environment, because the fact that the film stock we use, it's the ISO of the film is so low that I had to explore with multiple light setups just to get the sense of how sensitive the film is, and also how to get the chiaroscuro effects that I try to achieve in the film. And I think my film was greatly inspired by Maya Deren, because, well, especially her film is called At Land. So she used a lot of ingenious way of false matches just to match up and stitches together all different landscapes together, and how she represents different aspects of the film, and well, different aspects of the dream state, and that also one subconscious in the film medium. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. So this will be the last question that I ask, and then there's questions from the audience that we'll shift to. Most, if not all, of your films have experimental artistic elements. So will you tell us about one of the ways you experimented with time or color, editing, sound, cinematography, whatever experiment you would like to discuss? So Ian, we'll start with you again.
Okay, so I think one of the experiments I made was because the fact that I used the 60 millimeter medium. So originally I planned to shoot entire film in 16 millimeter, but just because of the challenges we faced during the pandemic, I had to stitched up with a couple of shots from my iPhone 10. Because after we developed the film, came back from LA, we just realized that this film is just too dark to be useful in any way. So for those particular 3 or 4 shots, I had to shoot those again with my actors, and then I used my iPhone 10. So I think this is one challenge, but I think one good thing coming out of this is we can compare how the digital format is different from the film stock mediums the filmmakers used in the last century, and also so you can see very clearly, for example, the film stock, it has a very crisp look on screen, but the digital medium, it's more sensitive to light, but it's leaving out more details. For example, the chiaroscuros, it's just more stunning and beautiful in the 60mm medium. And also another thing I experimented with is just the cutting, and also the fact that I used the still pictures as well as the moving pictures in the same film. So it's kind of like what Chris Marker did in his Le Jetée. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mo?
Okay, so in my film, I think the most experimental aspect of it was the storytelling structure. So another inspiration that I took for my film was from a YouTube video. It was an interview of a bunch of protesters in Hong Kong. Basically, that video just asked what did they want to tell their loved ones in case they were arrested or injured. So then I took this thought into my film. So my film is split into 2 parts. The first part is basically just a very subjective approach to my personal experience. It just documents different days and documents what happened. And then the second part is it's like a letter. It's like a fictional letter that I wrote to my loved ones, to my parents. And it just basically, it tells about, it doesn't just tell what I personally think. It was like a medium that I used to also force out the thoughts that many other protesters had in their mind. So this is, I don't even know if this is experimental, but this is like a thought that I was thinking when I was making the film.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think like in terms of like technical experimentation, it was a really great learning process in trying to create like a completely like black non-space was really interesting. And I had a couple of people that were super knowledgeable about lighting that really taught me a lot while we were shooting. And then I think the biggest kind of experiments were with sound design. And I worked with a couple of my friends on that and creating like song as like a trigger for memory that is like a recurring theme. And then through the sound design, escalating the time pressure through like repetitive, like rhythmic sound design. And that was all something like new to me, and making those sounds and editing them. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think for mine, what felt most experimental to me was probably what was newest to me also, because previous to this work, I had done other like poetry, essay, video type productions. But this one included these 3D graphics or 3D models that I made in this program called PhotoScan, which I mentioned earlier. And it was really fun to make these because the process of PhotoScan is that it builds a mesh and then a model with texture of 3D images based on a 360-degree rotation of the space or the landscape or the object. And so in this case, the object was me. And so I had someone, a friend of mine in my program, try to take as stable 360-degree shots of my body with a camera and then import those into the program so that it could build this very erratic sort of eroding model of myself, which I then superimposed over landscape, kind of mundane but sublime landscape images of Marin headlands, of the fog, the bodies of fog moving in and out. And so the kind of graphic match between those two things was really exciting to me. It kind of achieved this like 4K clarity of the stable land with the fog bodies moving in and out, really crisp. Then with my really eroded, corroded 3D body superimposed over it, kind of being zoomed in and out with a digital hand. And that was really fun because I sort of flipped what the program should have been used for. And I'm actually looking forward to playing around with it more in the future and seeing how I could add it to video.
Thank you.
Again.
Let's see, Elizabeth. Oh, can you unmute yourself?
I saw that. I don't know why that happened. One of the experimental elements that I had the most fun with, I guess, was in the editing process, was how I chose to edit the footage once I had it. So it was pretty visceral footage to have, and I didn't really know what to do with it, but I've always worked almost exclusively with found footage. And so making match cuts and strange edits. And I really, really love Scott Stark. His early work is some of my absolute favorite. So once I had these shots, I shot on a mountain in a forest, so it was all covered in snow. So there's a lot of stark white backdrops to everything, which made shots of blood as they creeped in on white snow. There was a lot of interesting ways to play with how much red and how much white took up each frame, and just kind of experimenting with having footage that was so important and had so many moments of vulnerability, but picking a select few and choosing when to show them and choosing when not to, and understanding that you can make a lot of different things with a great amount of footage, and making one specific capsule.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Hi, so our film is actually a narrative one. So we mainly experimented on the elements of mise-en-scène that could help us set up an ambience or a mood. For example, lighting. Like in the middle, we switched the lighting to cold tone to warm tone to set up a dreamlike ambience. And we also used bubbles, and we made them come out of like cigarette smokes to also like kind of set up this ambience. And in the end of the film, we used a projector to project a kind of picture of a landscape onto the main characters. And this was like, I guess, a sense of like total submission. I guess except for these, one of the thing that felt experimental to us or felt like a challenge was how to, I guess, address issues that are larger than us without like making light of it. And that felt like a personal experiment to us both. Yeah, thank you.
So I experimented the most with repetition and rhythm. I was really inspired by Colleen Smith, who says like, if you want to make a point or have your audience understand what you're trying to portray, repeat it. And a big theme I focus on in my film is the use of names and the way Lupe Velez takes on the role of many characters with many different names, and the difficulty of her co-stars trying to pronounce her very Latina names that are, yeah. And basically, I played with the idea of deconstructing these very long 5 names that she has, and just kind of playing with it, and like kind of going from going from like, oh, from one name to this long, almost paragraph like name. And I just wanted to kind of focus on the fact that someone can take on so many names, and and her not being able to finish it. What she's always saying, a very big important sequence in my film is where she's on the phone, and when someone asks her name, this white woman comes in and yanks the phone out of her hand, and I kind of really play with that, and I slowed it down and I repeated it multiple times, just to kind of emphasize how her voice is taken away and she can't say her name and she can't speak for herself. And I think I also played a little bit with time, and I kind of wanted the repetition to, in the first half, it was very like consistent and it was a lot of cuts. And then in the second half of the film, I kind of like slowed it down, and I left it at this very long sequence of her singing. And it's kind of just like this time of like reflection of, I think the audience can take as like, you know, to think about what just happened in the first half. And it's kind of a very great contrast from what you see in the first half to the second half.
Yes, I think I experimented the most with cinematography and directing. I really didn't want to direct in kind of the violent way that I thought she had been directed before, where she had been made into all kinds of play different exotic characters, or and I wanted to basically start out with the direction and then let her wander in that direction or in a landscape, and allow her to also wander in her memory, and to be more of a kind of overhearer of her own reflections, and then to piece it together later in a way where she would be reflecting herself or reflecting on an image with almost without mediation. And I think that kind of, I wanted to play with her as a director, because I remember her directing me when I was little sometimes when she took photographs of me. So I didn't really feel comfortable directing her in that way. And I just basically wanted to create a room for her to play in. So that was my goal. And otherwise, I mean, the films that I was looking at, like the journals of Jean Seberg, or which has a very heavy voiceover from the journals of the actress. I didn't want to kind of force her to answer questions or put her in a direct interview situation. So I really wanted always to be like just off screen, in a very intimate kind of space where, you know, I wasn't like putting her on the spot or making her take a position, but rather have these moments, different moments in her career kind of inform each other, basically. And also, you know, Hollywood Plays Itself by Tom Anderson was also a very big influence, and the way that he allows Hollywood to tell its own story, and trying to let the footage do that as much as possible, at the same time as it kind of reveals, obviously, its ironies and its flaws.
Thank you.
Yeah, while making the film, I experimented a lot in film frame rates, and I displayed actions of the characters in moving images, frame extraction, and still images, inspired by the film La Jetée. And I was trying to play on the cinema specificity by changing those frame rates, and to resonate on how cinema is an illusion or a container of images, which is constructed by discontinuous single frames of images connected together in increasingly higher speed. And by using the three different kinds of frame rates, the film, I'm trying to convey, like to show the nature of this illusion, and to reflect on the notion of cinema as a container or skein, binding images together in a deceptive way. And I also experimented a lot in intertitles and subtitles. And by dividing the film into 4 parts through intertitles demonstrating the time lapse, and also by using intertitles of pseudo dictionary meanings of the word room in the middle of images as an interruption to interruption. I'm trying to like play on the notion of room, and each time in different parts, I extended this meaning from a space to an organ of flesh, and to a dark room where photographic and artificial images are made, and then to a metaphorical level. And yeah, by using like interacting images and voices and languages, I'm trying to like create this kind of like experimental way to like show the very special experience.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first 2 questions are for Ho-Yin Mo. Why do you think a first-person feeling-based approach is more moving than a fact-based documentary approach? And also, that was from Wong Tae Hong, and then also from Catherine Wong. Are there any specific messages that you want to bring out through your project?
Okay, so yeah, for the first question, I think in a first person approach, it breaks, like there are a lot of constraints in traditional media, like in traditional news. And then I think by shooting this film in a first person perspective, it breaks off a lot of that constraints. Like as an independent filmmaker, you don't really have to think about a lot of rules and like just rules in general. And then I think the most important thing about a first person perspective film is it can be very moving for some audience because the emotion is very genuine, it's very real. It's not like on the news you just see objective facts that are reported by journalists that are and journalists are part of they're just there to observe. They're not there to experience the event itself. They're just there to document and observe. But I think a first person approach is very powerful because you can tell the audience that the things that you see right now is very genuine and it's actually happening. And then for the second question, I think I mean for me personally, this film is very personal, it's very political, and I think the film, I have 2 targeted audience for this film. The first one is like just international audience. I just wanted to tell the people that what is happening in Hong Kong, and then the second audience is just the entity that I'm part of, which is Hong Konger. And then I just want to, through this project, I just want to tell people that on there, and then the struggles that people are experiencing, and then that's my ultimate goal, to just use film as a medium, as a very effective medium to tell people what is going on around us. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. The next couple of questions are for Elizabeth. One from Noah Mason. I'm interested to hear more about how this project helped you confront your phobia. Jack Chase follows up, did you ever get the blood out of the dress? And you already answered this a little. What films inspire you? You mentioned Scott Stark, but if there was anything else you want to add.
Sure. To lead with the blood dress question, because that's, I find, the most comical of the questions. It was so cold that I was in the snow, and the blood never actually set into the fabric. So when I got home, or not home, but to my friend's house, we washed it in the shower immediately, and I actually still have it in my closet. It's mostly fine, which is crazy. How it helped me confront the phobia, I think that that's a really interesting one. I think that part of the reason that I wanted to make this series and why it interested me was oftentimes when you have phobic experiences, almost always they happen without an element of consent. It's something that happens to you, that you're thrown into, that you're subjected to, and that you have to, that you ideally, like in your own personal life, day-to-day life, you ideally avoid. It's something that you don't want to face because it elicits a fear in you that others describe as irrational. You might have your own rational reasons for them. I certainly know that I do. But one of the elements of it was the element of choice and choosing to make it. Also, just the setting was so completely different than anything else, any other setting in which you would encounter receiving an IV. Most of you are not usually well and conscious and aware, or outside or on the side of a mountain. It's not usually your friend who's helping you. It was a whole, it completely took my headspace and flipped it on its side. Everything I had understood about that experience was very different in this, but simultaneously it was still something, it was still footage of something I was very scared of. And it was funny, when we were done with the shoot, I got in the car and I said, I did great, because I let them give me, and you know, they looked at me and they went, uh-huh. And I said, what, you guys seem scared. And they said, you were freaking out the whole time. And I watched the footage back for the first time, and I didn't actually remember in the moment some of the things that had come out of my mouth, because that's sometimes what happens when you're in a really seriously traumatic like headspace. And so I editing that was one of the craziest things ever in order to confront a phobia. I think that there's an element of like both sadism and masochism. It's just very, very strange to do that. Another film, another artist in general that inspires me a lot with playing with those boundaries is Kenneth Anger. Yeah, but I don't know, that answers all the three.
Great, thank you so much. So of course there's so much more to talk about with your films, but we're at the point that we need to stop. So I want to thank you for both your films and your comments about them. It's been a real pleasure to hear you reflect on them, a really wonderful conversation. So thank you all, and congratulations again to all of you. I also just want to take a moment to thank the behind the scenes work of Nat and Dave and Jeff and Chris. And I want to thank the audience for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. In the meantime, take good care.